I unlocked and tested everything in the new Chemicals Agents Warbond, and today we're going to take a look at everything and I'll share my opinions on the items available. We'll take a look at everything one by one, cosmetics aside, and at the end of the video I'll give you my overall thoughts on this Warbond. Now the Chemical Agents Warbond was the first Warbond ever released to not include any primary weapons. This Warbond was a little bit different in the sense that it actually comes out with two new stratagems, a Stim Pistol sidearm, a gas grenade, and some gas protection armor sets, and of course the typical cosmetics. Now the most important information you'll need to know before we proceed with this video is understanding how gas works in Helldivers 2. This will help you understand these items a lot better. What you need to know is all of the gas stratagems, weapons, and grenades alike all do the same amount of gas damage, and that damage is of 25 damage per second and a durable damage of 25 per second as well. When you compare that with the fire in Helldivers 2, the fire has a 50 regular and durable damage per second, twice as much as the gas. However, even though gas deals half the amount of damage fire does, it does have a few upsides. First off, the very blatant upside is that gas nowadays applies a confusion status on the enemy AI, which causes it to lose track of where you are and stop engaging at you as long as it remains under this effect. It will sometimes kind of swing blindly, but yeah, essentially it becomes blind and deaf, and it kind of just aimlessly wanders around and may even strike blindly into the air until it wears off a few short seconds later. Another difference between these two, which could be seen as an upside or a downside depending on the player, is that gas does not linger around. So for example, the Sterilizer gas weapon, if you shoot onto the floor, it doesn't turn the floor into some sort of caustic trap. It just kind of goes away right away. Whereas the flamethrower will light the floor on fire and anyone that steps on top of it. Now it's good news because you'll cause minimal self-harm damage and much less team damage, but it can be bad in the sense that you can't as easily gas out your enemies. Let me know if you think this is a good thing or a bad thing. Also, the gas damage has an armor penetration of 6, whereas the fire has an armor penetration of 4. I'm not exactly sure how much of a difference this is going to be, but I guess you can rest easy knowing that gas damage will literally apply to every enemy in the game. And lastly, the final thing you should know about gas is that gas damage does not stack. So if I apply gas damage from my Sterilizer, then call in a gas strike, then throw a gas grenade, this damage is not stacking. It's just resetting the gas effect on the enemy. So in other words, realistically, bringing multiple different sources of gas damage may be overkill, and you'll just be better off bringing one or at most 2 different ways of applying gas damage. For most of this recording and the background, I was running all of the gas options available, and I can tell you with confidence that going all out on gas weapons is not a good idea. You'll lack in damage pretty hard. Now, understanding gas a bit better, let's take a look at this Warbond. Starting off on the first page of the Warbond, we unlock the gas grenade right away. Now the gas grenade has no explosion damage. I mean, according to the database on helldivers.io, it deals 3 damage on explosion, so I guess there is that. What's worth noting is the gas grenade does not seal off bug holes due to the lack of explosion damage. The grenade will just kind of release a medium-sized cloud of gas, and that's about it. It's a pretty solid pick to have at least one member of your squad running gas grenades to be able to dish out gas damage and essentially throw in gas grenades onto patrols or bug breaches and causing AoE damage over time, while also confusing all of the enemies within this cloud, and essentially crowd controlling all of them. On the second page of the Warbond, we've got the Sterilizer, which is what I was most excited for in this Warbond, and I'm a bit sad to say that I'm pretty disappointed by it. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, which is to spread caustic gas to large groups of enemies. But after using all of the means of spreading gas in this game, I found the Sterilizer to be one of the worst or the worst choice. For example, the gas guard dog passively spreads gas without me having to lift a finger. The gas grenade creates large clouds of gas without me even having to get close, and the orbital gas strike creates a massive cloud of gas with a very low cooldown, and it deals projectile damage as well. Now, the Sterilizer on the other hand, I have to get very close to my enemies, and I also have to sacrifice dealing damage just for the sake of applying crowd control. And I mean sacrifice dealing damage because the Sterilizer has a very weak projectile damage of 1, which is 4 times less than that of the flamethrower. So knowing that the projectile damage is a big no-no, essentially what will kind of happen is you will often find yourself swapping to the Sterilizer to wildly spray gas around like a madman, to then switch back to your primary weapon and kill off the enemies that you've just gassed. But in my mind, it's like, wouldn't it just be better if I just killed them off right away instead of even gassing them in the first place? But you might think, oh Takibo, but it's probably going to be really good for spraying it into big swarms of enemies. But sadly, in my opinion, that's not really the case. Again, the damage is far weaker than that of the flamethrower, so you'll oftentimes have to refresh the gas effect even on the weaker enemies. And another issue is the enemies become confused. They don't become static, which means you might end up gassing into a swarm of enemies, and a few of those enemies will kind of just walk right past you, and once the gas effect clears out on them, now guess what? You've got enemies right behind you. When I tried this in solo play, I definitely don't recommend it. You're much better off just killing the enemy than spending precious time hitting them with the confused status. That's not gonna do you much good. For group play, it does have its benefits. You can fill in a support role where you dish out massive clouds of gas onto large groups of enemies, and this gas will CC them and render them useless, which your teammates can then go and nuke the living hell out of them. After all, this is the purpose of this weapon. It's not meant to be a killing machine, it's more like a crowd control thing. For me, it's a pass, but for people who enjoy being that useful support player on the team, you might enjoy this one. Now while we're still talking about the gas choices, let's just address the guard dog breath right away. Now, I kinda like this. As I said, I didn't like the Sterilizer much, especially for solo play, because I'd have to choose between killing enemies or just hitting them with CC. But the dog breath eliminates that issue altogether, which is why I prefer all of the other gas choices over the Sterilizer. The dog breath, you can just kind of have that little sucker dishing gas damage to enemies trying to hit you, and it will actually kind of save you a few times. By having the Scar Dog, it will CC your enemies for you, and you can just worry about dealing damage. Before this Warbond came out, I was worried that dog breath would absolutely destroy my team and myself by dealing team damage, but it definitely is not the case. I'm not exactly sure if they've coded it differently than other stratagems, but I'm not even sure if this guard dog even deals team damage in the first place. I mean, yeah, it probably does, but it truly is not noticeable. At least it wasn't in my experience. Granted, oftentimes I ran with a gas protection armor set, so that might have had something to do with it. But still, I did not feel it dealt any team damage, so it's a pretty solid pick for CCing your enemies for you. And lastly, on the last page, there's the Stim Pistol. And I'll say, this thing turned out a bit better than I thought. They gave us 24 stims. That's pretty solid, and it really will fit those support role players really well. I will say though, goddamn, this thing is hard to hit. You gotta ask your teammate to stand still. But here's the good news. When you do manage to stop missing all of your shots and actually land a stim shot, your teammate will think you're trying to TK them and will kill you and try to get you kicked off instead. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I guess it didn't really help that I ran for miles trying to hit him with my pistol. Oh, and yeah, you can't self-shoot with the Stim Pistol, which is a huge bummer in my opinion. Hopefully they'll change that in the future. I would personally love to see it added. And as for armor sets, there's not much to say there. It's a pretty standard armor set with 80% gas protection. What I will say is this: don't use this armor set unless you're planning on running gas strikes or if your team has a lot of people running gas items. Because as I said, the dog breath and the Sterilizer will almost never even cause self-harm, so there's kinda no reason to use this armor set. I really would only use it if you're planning on running into your own gas smoke for some reason or another, but generally, I would just pass on this armor choice. It's not that they're bad per se, it's that using gas weapons right now is a pretty safe endeavor, so there's kind of no reason to use these armors. Now overall, what do I think about this Warbond? I think this Warbond has a support role vibe to it. The Stim Pistol is very obviously a support choice, and all of the gas choices are used mostly to deal crowd control confusion than really causing any damage. I think it's awesome, and it introduces a whole new way to approach gas in Helldivers 2, so that's really cool. As for my solo playthroughs, I got a gas loadout gameplay coming out tomorrow, but overall, I don't necessarily see myself using any of these choices in this Warbond in future runs. Again, it just doesn't really fit the whole solo playstyle. As a solo player, you gotta deal with threat as fast as humanly possible, so wasting time dishing out CC before taking out enemies is not really that viable. I'd rather just deal as much damage as possible. But yeah, nonetheless, this Warbond is really good for a lot of players, and thank you guys very much for watching. I'll catch you legends on the next one. Peace!